I'd like to introduce Mauro de Fabritiis to the stage, who's just getting his microphone on. So we'll just wait for him. But after Mauro is going to do a presentation, I'm going to invite Andrew Gellatly onto stage, and he's going to moderate a panel. And both of these bits of content are going to be around advertising restrictions, which have already been spoken about a little in the previous sessions. But we're really going to get to grips with the hows and the whats and the whys and what it means for your businesses. So I think we're ready. Mauro, over to you.
And thank you to Gaming in Spain organization, to Willem van Oort for the opportunity to introduce this hot topic, let's say. Advertising restrictions, effects of the advertising restrictions on the market, sustainability of the market, what will happen in the future. There are many questions, many curiosities, but no facts to declare and no evidence of what the specific effects will be on this topic. I will start my conversation starting from some facts in this case and looking at the market in general. We have an evolution of the global level of the market that is around 450 billion euro at our estimation, combined with other estimation at the global level, with an increasing incidence of the online gambling that represents by and large the 12% of the global market. In terms of segments, casino and betting are driving the growth at the general level, representing the 80% of the industry right now. What about the different gaming markets? There is a general growth tendencies in all the major markets in Europe, and Spain presents a really dynamic growth with notwithstanding the GGR per capita really much less than the other comparable markets. Some look at the future. We estimate that the Spanish market in the next 3 years, couple of years, will overcome 1 billion euros GGR. What about the positioning? Last year we have seen some insights on that. Things are slightly changing, but there are some dominant facts. So international and highly investing operator position in, we are looking at the betting segment with big market share. Other local operators trying to face the competition, combining both channels, online and land-based, and other operators working in a niche and trying to differentiate. But it's really hard to compete without advertising, and even the same scenario with a different focus, because the casino is differently from betting, is focused only in some of the operators, the bingo-oriented operators, and for the rest, it's a Me Too product that is driving really the industry. Not many words regarding the poker that is in a monopolistic or oligopolistic situation, even if the international liquidity has pushed some new platform to enter the market. Let's see all this scenario from going back to the advertising topic, on which is the role of advertising in this growth, in the sustainability of the market, and why advertising is key and is important. First of all, advertising is one of the elements that contributes to the equilibrium of the industry. When I speak of industry, I speak of, let's say, the joining of operators, regulators, media, and all the actors involved in the value chain. So there is an equilibrium through the different factors like gaming offer, regulated market define a specific portfolio, specific products, specific taxation, technology in the double sense, the possibility for the operator to control the market, the possibility for operators to protect and to control the customers, the responsible gaming rules, and we have details through our director, Juan Espinosa, on this subject that are really sensible, and the advertising, the way the sector as a whole communicate to the market. If we change some of this circle, the equilibrium and the ecosystem will be compromised. But is advertising a sensible topic only for Spain? Unfortunately not. We have many examples worldwide speaking, and one of the most common, because of my origin, is Italy, that define a total ban of the advertising. To make the long story short, through a specific decree, Italy prohibited all the forms of advertising, allowing only some exceptions like Lotteria Italiana, the informative communications, the B2B communication, and some other topics that are, let's say, subject to interpretation. What about the situation in Spain? We had some years of political instability, and now it seems that the PSOE and Podemos will arrive to a compromise and will regulate the sector that, looking at our evidence, at the evidence we have from the street, is affected by a generalized negative opinion. But looks at the fact. Is the gaming sector so full of operators, so crowded? At the end, in Spain, there are around 60 operators. That is, by and large, less than the number of operators in other markets. And GGR per capita, as we see, is less than in other countries. There is a perceived invasion of the land-based offer. Maybe this could be true in some streets, but regions are controlling and limiting the market. There is a perceived growth of the advertising spend, but the total spend of advertising in Spain is quite reasonable and in the range of the incidence of the total spend in other comparable markets. What will be the next step? What we are going to face in the next weeks, months, I don't know. But the general mood is that the advertising should be controlled, should be limited, because it's harmful for the society and so on. So Podemos speaks about the total ban of gambling. There is another option, regulate advertising to equal gambling and tobacco, or regulate in some way the advertising. But let's look at the hypothesis of PSOE Podemos. What does it mean, regulate advertising, like tobacco and alcohol? Two different sectors, two different regulation. Tobacco, everything is punished and limited. Only it's allowed advertising inside tobacco stores, and in alcohol, some part of the offer it's punished and it's limited. The other parts, some kind of alcoholics are allowed, and in any way, the industry, because of specific constraints, have found workaround to avoid the limitation of the regulation, which will be the future in this sense of the advertising regulation in the gambling. And in my opinion, the way advertising will be regulated will sensibly affect to the sustainability of the industry. There are different models that could be run for Spain, like in other markets. The total ban. Total ban means that we are killing the opportunity for the market to promote the sector in the double sense, to promote the offer, and so to allow the industry, to allow the regulator, to allow the operator, to allow any actor in the industry to make lights in all the components of the offer, not only the product, but also the responsible gaming side, also the part that makes the legal gambling not comparable to the illegal one. So in a way, the ways to protect the customer. We are killing this opportunity, and we are indirectly foiling the black market and creating a threat on the channelization process that it's at the end of this stage right now. And so to come back, the other option, no regulation at all. So this means like a Far West, welcome to the jungle, and everyone will do whatever he wants, and it's not a wishful thinking to think about this scenario. We have to start about the effect, about the sensibility that specific categories have regarding the gambling, and we should find a way to regulate. Self-regulation, maybe it's auto-regulation, it's not enough. Most likely we need a definition of regulation, and Spain is in this direction. There are two possible ways to regulate. So regulation as a first step, and the co-regulation, and we are in this case, that means making the full value chain to sit at the same table and contribute to the decision. Because what it's true today and what it's a statement today could change tomorrow, especially taking into account the evolution of technology. So I think we will have time to discuss all these topics during our panel, and above all to define some guidelines regarding what should be controlled, what should be banned, and enter in some specific guidelines for the market, because nowadays we are, and at political level, the politics are worried about to stop, let's say, a perceived negative situation, but we are not taking care about how we should regulate the advertising in order to keep the sector sustainable and indeed to protect the customer. I hope that the time was not out of the schedule, and thank you.
Fantastic presentation and even better timekeeping, Mauro. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to invite Andrew Gellatly, who's the head of global research at Gambling Compliance, to the stage, who's going to introduce the panel, which is going to dissect this topic in even more detail. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Andrew Gellatly, one of the founders of Gambling Compliance and head of global research, as Tom just mentioned. I've got the pleasure of hosting the biggest panel of today, and probably with the least amount of time. If you've paid any attention to your program, you'll realize we've got a Skype call from Dominic Bearer at Intervetten coming up in about 20-something minutes. So I think I'm going to thank Mauro for setting the scene here. I don't really have to give too many introductory remarks, but I would like to invite all our panelists to the stage. Among them, Maarten, the Secretary General at the European Gaming Betting Association. Many of you will know him. Santiago Asensi, who's already been on stage, the Managing Partner at Asensi Abogados. I'd like to invite Simon Mukerjee, from the Global Partnerships Director at Genius Sports in London. Also, Mikel López de Torre, who's the Digital Director at Sportium, President of Jdigital, the industry lobbying group, whose voluntary code was mentioned earlier on by Juan Espinosa. We'll be learning a little bit more about that in a second. I think that's pretty much everyone. And we've got... Oh, Dominic is waiting, so that's good news. We're going to have time to ask some tough questions of this panel. This is a top flight panel of regulators, lawyers, lobbyists from across the industry, with perspectives stretching far beyond Spain, and Mauro has already set the scene of the European landscape. It seems the direction of travel is far from what you would call sustainable or viable at the moment. Consumer and political discontent with gambling advertising has reached breaking point in a range of jurisdictions around the world, and this is sweeping across Europe. We face the possibility of what could be described as a tobacco-style ban in Spain. So Mauro's point clearly was that advertising is key for a functioning of a valid market. To ask a fairly direct question, and I'm sorry to throw you under the bus, Guillermo, here, if you can't advertise in Spain, what's the point of having a license?
If you cut advertising in Spain, what's the point of having a license?
What is the point of having a license?
I could just, for answering your question, I would like to say that things have changed a lot in the last few years in Spain. We started to regulate the online gambling market in 2011, 2012, and the circumstances at that precise moment were different than the circumstances we are living right now. We've passed from a market with no betting shops. This is regulated by Comunidades Autónomas, we know, but we've passed from a market that had no betting shops at all, and now we have more than 4,000 betting shops in Spain, not counting on those betting terminals that are installed in bars in some Comunidades Autónomas. We've passed from a market with no investment in advertising to a market that surpasses 300 million euros in advertising. So the dynamic is absolutely different, and this has been shown in different public concerns. Not only that, I mean, the overall context of the gambling industry has changed in Spain. We've moved from a 25% of the GGR to a 20% of the GGR. We've moved from a market with not so many games involved to a market that has quite an overall offer of products right now. So I think that things have changed. And we know as a gambling regulator that that advertising is a very good instrument to channel channel customers to the regulated market. We know that, and we have always been comfortable with that position. But we have to understand that right now, the moment is absolutely different. We only have, as Juan said the Director General said in his brilliant presentation, we've passed on the market with 100% of illegal market to a market that only has probably 3% of illegal offer.
It seems like you have a lot to lose.
Which is something ridiculous. So what is going to happen if there is a complete ban? I think that there are a lot of theoretical studies saying that, probably it's going to be a problem for the regulated market, is going to increase the illegal market, but we don't know for sure because this is something that has not been experimented in regulated markets, in major regulated markets. So, as Mauro, for your appealing presentation, I think that the experience of Italy, we are not going to judge or criticize whatever.
Thanks. Clearly, people are still looking to join the market in Spain. I mean, Santiago, when operators come to you seeking a license in Spain, what do you tell them at this point in terms of advice on what their license might be worth?
Well, I tell them that they should get a license. Spain is a fantastic market. It's growing. The numbers have been shown today by not only the General Director, also by Mauro, shown the trend. And as I said, the headline of Espinosa's speech this morning was the online gaming market is going to keep growing in Spain, and this is for sure.
Okay. But there are something like 30 licenses that have been awarded under the new window, and those operators are coming into the market in a situation where they may not be able to get any market share.
Well,
That's quite,
Well,
that's quite a dark prospect for them, surely.
Our work consists in getting them the license. The decision of going ahead in Spain is them. And I believe that the CEO and the internal experts that they have in-house, when they decide about to move forward in a market, is because they have studied the details, they have seen the numbers, they have, get information from experts, and finally they decide to take that step. That said, when it's about advertising, I mean, we can have, and we do, the worst politicians ever in Spain, from any of the wins, okay? But the worst news have happened in this, in the outcome of these general elections in terms for gambling, but it's not everything up to them. What I mean, they can decide to ban advertising, a full ban on gambling, but it's not only about that. It's also about what can we take to court. You cannot decide to implement a full ban on gambling. There is a proportionality principle, a necessity principle, legally speaking, that says that restrictive measures apply to an economic activity that is absolutely legal, subject to a license, etc. Cannot be applied happily or per se or whatsoever. So this is, any ban on that could be challenged. I brought a test that I would like to read, and sorry, I didn't get the Madonna version of the micro, but let me read this. This is a legal test, okay? And it says, it cannot be ignored that absolute prohibition systems have frequently failed to achieve their moralizing objectives and have in fact become situations of tolerance or widespread clandestine gambling with more real dangers than those that were to be avoided, and in an environment of lack of legal certainty. This could look like an abstract or an extract of an opinion article nowadays, perhaps in gambling compliance or elsewhere, regarding advertising. Well, guess what? This is the first legal text on gambling that we have since 1977. This is the royal decree that decriminalizes, and this is the first paragraph of the preamble.
Well, so, in theory, a free market with open competition is the ideal outcome, but that's not what public opinion seems to be wanting at the moment. And I want to, I mean, looking at the examples that Mauro pointed to, Italy, and I can point to the UK as another example. The noisiest markets with the most licenses are the ones where these advertising bans are happening. Mikel, can I ask you, are there too many licenses in Spain already?
How is it working? Yeah, that's fine. Look, I think that's it's a growing market. It's hard to say how many licenses are the right number for any market. If we take the size of the market and the amount of operators that they have in markets in our vicinity, in neighboring markets, we do seem to have a bit of an overcrowded market. But frankly, I think there's still a lot of upwards trajectory, as Juan Espinosa mentioned before, the director, and it's yet to be seen the size of the market that we can see and the size of the average size of operator that we will see. I don't think necessarily in a free market you need to limit the amount of licenses that you give away. It's more of a business decision whether you enter or not.
But Mauro, if I could return to you, I mean, in Italy you have a number of licenses, more than 60 licenses, and some of those operators now are effectively, should we call them zombie operators? They have very tiny market shares, 0.05%, and they are, while they're still alive and moving, they're pretty much zombie businesses. Some of them are handing in their licenses and leaving the market. Is that the kind of thing you would expect to see happen now in Spain in the event of an advertising ban?
First of all, I think that the banning effect in Italy has not been measured, and we need time to look at the real effect advertising banning could have. I mean, there are some of the specific measures that are written in the law that are clear, but there are some aspects that are not so clear. So the advertising regulation is something that we should look in details. And so the key is the interpretation of the regulation and the final fact that an operator receives a fine or not. Because, for example, is affiliation banned? Affiliation is a way of promoting the marketing. Is the bonus excluded from the regulation? So there are many gray area that we have to interpret, and this is the step forward. Regarding Spain, we are at the principle of the process, and so I think that with Código de Conducta, with the new version of Código de Conducta, with all the specific rules regarding advertising in terms of time and product you can advertise during the day, and other measures regarding the detection of the identity of the customer and other measures of responsible gambling, we are some step forward in the process. If something should be blocked, it really depends which will be the effect, because I think the market could face and could be sustainable also with some restrictions, but we need to specify in a paper, in a more detail, let's say, Código de Conducta.
That's you, not me. Let's assume the worst, that some more restrictions are coming. Now, in Italy, we've seen the example of, and I think Juan Espinosa mentioned it in his presentation, of workarounds of affiliate sites, of referral sites. In Italy, you see sports stadia now where there are sites like Eurobet.fun or bwin.sports, which are effectively free play sites. It's a workaround which is yet to be addressed. But Maarten, is this something that you think is possibly a trap for the industry? Is it simply going to be the next thing to be cracked down on, the workarounds?
Well, I think what it shows is that advertising is an essential part of your online offering. Without advertising, I think it's impossible for operators to survive long term. And so if you have an advertising ban on TV, you find other ways of making your product known. And there are two reasons why legislators have legislated the online gambling market. You can choose which order they are, but I think one is taxation and the other is consumer protection. If you regulate the market because you assume that people play, but you prefer them to play in a regulated environment, then you need to have a viable business and you need to have a viable market. So an advertising ban will not allow you to have a proper functioning market, and if you have no offline visibility, then you need to be online and be on TV, and so you will work around it, because I think it's essential for an operator, although you have to spend a lot of money. So I don't think it's by will that an operator starts spending money on different topics. I mean, if they can spend less money and have a larger margin, it will be preferable. I think it's just necessary to advertise one way or the other, and it shows you the essence of advertising to do business.
Now the online industry group Jdigital has just announced some voluntary limits on its advertising practices. We've seen voluntary limits in the UK. Simon, I wanted to ask you, what has been the effect of taking television advertising out of the broadcast signal during games? Where has the money gone if it's no longer being spent on that? What is the impact of shirt sponsorship? You know a lot about sports rights holders and teams and the effect on that industry, and also how operators are spending their marketing money. What's the experience now in the UK? What can we expect in Spain?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's kind of a multifaceted one, so to try and unwrap some of that a little bit. I'm coming from a perspective where I'm coming to the gaming industry from being outside it, but having worked in branding and advertising agencies. And I think what's interesting is that people who have spent money in building their brands and building trust and relationships are the ones that are continuing to do well, irrespective of how they then proceed. And I think that what's interesting about the increasing bans on TV are that actually the money will move online and is moving online. And actually that may be a force for good, because it enables some of the things that that we want to talk about, that we want to do sort of exclusions around around. I don't know whether it's my microphone or something, but yeah. So I think that the move to online is potentially quite a positive one. Is it too close or something? Is that better? Is that slightly better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll try that. Okay.
That's it. I think you've got it there.
So yeah, I think the move towards online advertising potentially may be a positive in some of the issues that we've looked to address, because actually, whilst the online environment has been used primarily for acquisition, it is capable of doing so much more than that, and it is capable of building brands amongst discrete audiences. And when it comes to things like excluding people, there are increasing technologies and increasingly, sophisticated ways of using AI, machine learning, to exclude those problem gamblers and those minors that we'd want to do. And in fact, as a slight outlier on this panel, as being a sort of services provider, we use a lot of those technologies already, contextually, etc., to read what's on the page, to make sure that in as far as possible, and no system can ever be absolutely perfect, in as far as possible, that we do exclude minors and problem gamblers. And I think that's an initiative that we'd like to continue when we're working with various industry bodies on doing that.
Guillermo?
I want to continue with that point of view. It is well known from academic researchers that advertising has an impact, a negative impact on two layers of society. It is not that these advertising issues and banning or not, whatever, doesn't have an impact in anybody. I mean, gambling advertising has an impact in minors and in problem gamblers. And this is studied and is well known by academic researchers. So there are studies that are saying that minors are able to recall perfectly a brand, a gambling brand, and they can link that brand to certain advertising strategies. So they were able to understand the fundamentals of gaming before being adult people. So this is something that we have to take into account. And this is something very important. There's another point. I will finish just in a second. Problem gamblers, this is demonstrated from an academic point of view, that with advertising, they have more difficulties in stopping gambling. I mean, they don't cut down the gambling involvement because of advertising. So the truth is that advertising does affect to certain layers of society, and we have to assume that. And from that point onwards, we have to do what we have to do.
That's a good point. There are some academic studies that point to the issues with problem gamblers and so on. But if you ban advertising, you simply drive it to social media and to affiliate sites, and that surely affects children even more.
I'm not saying where we have to put the limits, because this is not something that pertains to regulators. It has more to do with political trends and political issues. And of course, we are there to assess these political trends, but this is something that is out of our...
So I want to go back to something that Maria raised with the question of evidence, and some stats she produced, which seemed to me extraordinarily high, the idea that 50% of children in Spain have gambled online. That seems preposterous to me. Now, that implies that 50% of the children in Spain have been able to open an online account and somehow or other get past KYC. It doesn't really seem very plausible. Guillermo is shaking his head. But would more research, more evidence actually make a difference, or are people just predisposed to believe these statistics, believe the worst, and act against them? Mikel?
Okay. So I think there are quite a few examples of everything that's wrong about how gambling is being treated in the media in Spain for the last couple of years. One of the main issues that we have is that no one is even checking any figures at all. I actually said the same thing last year in this same stage. And we talked about that particular piece of news. If 50% of minors in Spain were gambling online, that would mean 8 million minors were gambling online. As you saw from Juan's presentation, there's 1.5 million gamblers overall in Spain, total. So, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Those studies have no validity. But having said that, and I could put a lot more examples from Maria Rosa's presentations from those 3 examples. We still need to acknowledge that there's social unrest around not just the opening of betting shops. And honestly, we need to erase that thought from our head for the same reason that retail companies need to erase the idea from their heads that the problem is gambling advertising. There's a problem with gambling, and that's perceived as an increase of betting shops and excessive advertising or overly aggressive advertising. And what we need to do is not say, no, it's those guys. What we need to do is acknowledge our bit and do our bit to make sure that we put it right. That's exactly the principle and the spirit behind the amendment of the Code of Conduct, which has been in place since 2012. I mean, it's not a new Code of Conduct, but we just modified it to address the main claims or the main topics of unrest that we perceive from different social and political actors.
So you announced some amendments last week. Will there be more? Is there more to come? Were you going to go further if necessary? Or how will you decide?
Frankly, I think the key topic has already been addressed by the director. I think we need to not just leverage technology, which I think we're all doing, or at least the vast majority of operators are working with artificial intelligence to start identifying problematic gamblers early on, and addressing those that particular segment of the customer base. But we should make it more visible market-wide that we have these initiatives, and potentially, and I think that was I think it was the second point of the 3 points that they talked about, unifying the vision of how gamblers are spending today across multiple operators, for me, is the key point. We tend to work in silos. Like we can come together and push initiatives like this advertising code of conduct. Essentially, when we feel under threat, or when we feel there's sufficient pressure for us to have to make a move. But I think we should be more proactive, and we should take a more proactive approach into developing more visible market-wide initiatives. And in particular, I think around artificial intelligence, there's a lot of work to be done.
So that's one of the positive arguments you would make, Maarten?
Yeah, just to flesh on what you just said, I think the overarching concern that it comes back, although advertising may now be in the news of political discussion, I think it's always been and will continue to be consumer protection and responsible gambling. And for us to have a sustainable business, I think this needs to be an integral part of everything that we do, including advertising. And I think, as you said, minors and problem gamblers are always a sensitive and hot topic. And so the quality of the advertising and the way that we address issues like minors, like responsible gambling, I think needs to improve as a sector. And I think code of conduct, as now in Spain, is really a way forward. But I think we need to look at the quality of the advertising. Just as an example, I don't know whether you watch Formula 1, but the main sponsor is Haijer, which is a beer company, sponsoring a race where you drive as fast as possible and drink alcohol at the same time. But their message is, don't drink and drive, and they get away with it. And I don't think that we're there with the gambling industry at all, not even near. And so there's a lot to be done by our sector in terms of responsible gambling and minor protection. And the quality of the advertising, I think, needs to improve and reflect better. Social, as Juan very well put it, we should not be tolerated, but we should be part of society more than we are now.
Yeah, I just wanted to completely agree with that. I mean, I think that, it's been looked upon as a sort of a cat and mouse game a little bit. And I think, when regulations come in, people go the other way and try and do sort of other things. And I think actually it is time to have a grown-up conversation around suppliers, operators, the regulators, and actually come together on a series of things that we can do. And I think, the initiative that you guys have put together in Spain is a really positive one, and one that's sort of echoed in the UK and some of the things that's happening there. With the Betting and Gaming Council, for example, recently has announced a similar sort of code of conduct and best practice. And I think that's exactly what we need, is to share learning, share experiences. It's a positive industry. I mean, the director put a fantastic slide up about, how many actually participate in online gambling. It's very small. So room for growth in some ways, but, you know, and the problem percentage within that percentage is tiny. So there's a political perception around it, and I think that, you know, the whole job of advertising and marketing, and in my previous roles, that's exactly what we did, is to change perceptions. Perceptions sort of drive a kind of accepted reality, but actually they're false and can be misleading. And I think if we can act together more and more, and instead of a box-ticking exercise, really lean into the challenge and accept it and move forward, that would be a very, very good thing.
Okay. Do we have time for some questions, Willem? Questions? Got 5 more minutes for questions. Anyone got a question out there? One question for the panel? Well, let's take on Simon, just following where you were. I wonder whether perhaps this, and particularly following Juan Espinosa's presentation that showed the very low participation rates, whether isn't this just a symptom of people's distrust of capitalism and big data gathering organizations? There are calls for bans of oil companies, for instance. You know, it may be easier to prove the utility of something like transportation and fuel, but nevertheless, people are very unwilling to listen to more advertising. Is gambling just being swept up in a backlash against big tech, big capitalism?
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly part of the problem. I think we are in this, you know, perfect storm, if you like, of, you know, no one likes the online media giants. You know, they've become the ogres of the current world, right? Facebooks and Googles, who are, interesting, not represented here. You know, but I think it, you know, it is part of that challenge. It is part of an increasing awareness about the environment. It's an increasing awareness about mental health, about wellness in general. So it plays into all those kinds of topics. And, you know, it's always easy to find the horror stories of the, you know, about the gambling industry without talking about, you know, actually for most people, it's a harmless way to have some fun, and it's not a problem for the vast majority of people who engage in it. And I think that kind of messaging needs to be much more, you know, prevalent in some of the things that we do.
But that's one of the criticisms that people, when they talk about needs for a tobacco-style ban, that's the thing they point to with the gambling industry, is that its similarities with tobacco are that it has powerful lobbying muscle, Mikel. It attempts to portray its activity as socially acceptable, like tobacco. Why isn't it like tobacco? Why will it avoid tobacco's fate?
And, the main argument is that every cigarette is bad for you, and 99% of people gamble without any problems whatsoever. So I think that's obviously the main difference in the two. And I think therefore I think there's no comparison in the sense of that product. But I do think that, as I said again, the responsible gambling part of it is really the key part. And for us as an industry to have a better, sustainable, long-term relationship also with the regulator. And the other thing, again, I think the reason why the markets get regulated online is to protect the consumer. I think that's for tobacco a very different starting point. I think there was no online gambling, became available. Most people do it without any problems. The legislator decides to regulate it, to protect, to have a framework, consumer protection, tax it. And within that context, you need to look at online gambling. I don't think comparison with tobacco makes that way any sense. Not very useful either.
I agree on this point, and I personally think that differently from tobacco and alcohol, gambling, especially if we are speaking of online gambling, is, let's say, embedded in the technology. We are checking the customer from the registering to the deposit to the customer behavior. And so through the sophisticated technology, we can have as a whole, from the regulator side and from the operator side, we can detect and define all the actions we want. So going to the second, third question you did, I think that more than thinking which is the channel to block. It's television banned, or it's the social, or it's the wall in the street. We should think about the content. Which are the allowed contents? Which are the part of advertising that protect the customer and protect the sector? And so, which is the way we could communicate, or which are the limits? Because if we are thinking about the channels, maybe our regulation will be old the day after. This is the risk I see.
A quick comment by my side. We should think that we have done something wrong in order to have this kind of comparison permanently. Why gambling is permanently compared to a substance like tobacco, which is bad, from the second number one. While gambling, most of the people who does it enjoys, it's a recreational activity, and just a low percentage of the society has a problem with it. I mean, perhaps the gambling companies, and we should not only blame the society, but also ourselves, and perhaps the gambling company, the main stakeholder here, has been too busy counting the money instead of allocating some in order to improve, through lobby actions, the view that the society has got about this industry.
It's true, there's no safe level of tobacco consumption, but there obviously is a safe level of gambling.
I think the picture Juan Espinosa showed regarding the percentage of gambling addicted, let's say, compared to the alcohol, tobacco, weight excess, and are quite representative.
Alcohol is good.
Oh, Guillermo,
I agree with the opinions of my colleagues. I think that the online gambling industry has a lot of good things to show to society. Complete traceability of operations and the possibility of utilizing artificial intelligence in order to understand in a better way the behavior of customers and help to solve their problems before even the problems are really serious. I think that there are a bunch of things that can be adopted by the online gambling industry in Spain. I think that the online gambling industry has to be more proactive than reactive. And I think that the initiative of the Code of Conduct is a good initiative, and I think it's a good path.
Willem, are we ready to dial Dominic? Or and one more chance for any questions that might be out there. In that case, I think we've concluded a pretty successful panel.
John wants one last thing.
Oh, hang on. Maura's got one last
I think it's
the last word
it's important.
Mauro.
The topic of advertising is something sensible worldwide. We started Italy. Maybe it's the worst case mentioned in all the newspapers, but any country is now worried about advertising limitation. So everyone asks for, as I said before, for data regarding effects, but we have not results right now. But I think that there are common logics in this area, and so, as you say before, we should put in common the experiences and the use cases of many countries, because I think that some specific rules and some specific way to, let's say, to define a model for the advertising and some restriction principles could be easily adapted from country to country and have a common logic. And this is really important. It's really an area of cooperation, especially if we speak of the online gambling.
Okay, well, the idea of cross-border cooperation in European gambling sectors has been tried before with mixed degrees of success, so we'll see if this advertising plan gets some traction in the Spanish market and beyond. Thank you all for a wonderful panel. There's more talk about advertising later on today, but I'd like the audience, if you could, to thank the panel for all its insights into the advertising situation and what's next. Thank you.